Sarah Martinez sat in the back row of her music theory class at Lincoln High School. She tried to make herself small in her chair. The classroom smelled like old books and the cleaning spray the janitor used every morning. Sunlight came through the tall windows and made dust dance in the air. Professor Chun stood at the front of the room. He was a tall man with gray hair and glasses that always slipped down his nose. He wore the same brown jacket every day. Sarah had noticed this about him in the 6 months since she started taking his class. "Class, I have an important announcement," Professor Chun said. He pushed his glasses up his nose. "Your final project for this semester will be a solo performance." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She looked around the room at her classmates. Most of them had been playing piano since they were little kids. Some of them could play pieces that sounded like magic. Sarah had only started playing piano 6 months ago. "Each of you will choose a classical piece," Professor Chun continued. "You will perform it in front of the entire music department. We will also have special guests. 3 judges from the State Conservatory will be here to watch your performances." Girl named Madison raised her hand. She had long blonde hair and always sat in the front row. "How long should our piece be?" she asked. "At least 3 minutes," Professor Chun answered, "but no more than 5 minutes. This is about quality, not length." Sarah's heart started beating fast. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours when she thought about playing in front of people. She had trouble playing for just Professor Chun during her private lessons. "The performance will be in exactly 8 weeks, Professor Chun said. "That gives you plenty of time to choose your piece and practice. Remember, this performance counts for 40% of your final grade." Madison raised her hand again. "Can we play any classical piece we want?" "Yes, but it must be from the classical period or Baroque period, no modern music. No popular songs. This is about showing your understanding of classical technique and style." Sarah wrote down everything Professor Chun said in her notebook. Her handwriting was messy because her hands were shaking a little. She tried to think of classical pieces she knew. The only one she could think of was "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," but she was pretty sure that was not what Professor Chun meant. After Professor Chun finished explaining the project, he handed out a list of suggested pieces. Sarah looked at the names on the paper. Most of them looked very long and had strange words she could not say. There were pieces by Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and other composers she had heard of but never really listened to. The girl sitting next to Sarah was named Emma. She had short red hair and freckles. Emma looked at the list and smiled. "I think I'll do the Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven," she said. "I've been working on it for 2 years." 2 years. Sarah felt sick. She had been playing piano for 6 months. How could she possibly do a piece that took 2 years to learn? When class ended, everyone started talking about what piece they would choose. Sarah heard Madison telling her friends about a piece by Chopin that she had performed in competitions. Another boy named David was talking about a Bach invention that he had learned the year before. Sarah packed her books slowly. She did not want to join any of these conversations. She felt like she did not belong in this class. Everyone else seemed so confident and experienced. They talked about composers like they were talking about friends. Professor Chun noticed that Sarah was still in the classroom after everyone else had left. "Sarah," he called, "do you have any questions about the assignment?" Sarah walked up to his desk. She held the list of suggested pieces in her hand. "Professor Chun, I'm not sure I can do this," she said quietly. Professor Chun looked at her with kind eyes. "Why do you think that? Everyone else has been playing for so many years. I only started 6 months ago when my grandmother's piano came to our apartment. I don't know any of these pieces." Professor Chun nodded. "I understand your concern, Sarah, but you have made wonderful progress in the past 6 months. You have natural musical ability. But 3 minutes in front of judges from the State Conservatory? What if I make mistakes?" "Everyone makes mistakes," Professor Chun said. "Even professional pianists make mistakes. What matters is that you try your best and show what you have learned." Sarah looked at the list again. One name caught her eye, "For Elise" by Beethoven. She had heard this piece before. Her grandmother sometimes hummed it while she cooked dinner. What about this one? Sarah pointed to Für Elise on the list. Professor Chun smiled. That's a beautiful choice. It's one of Beethoven's most famous pieces. It's not too difficult, but it has lovely melody and emotion. I think it would be perfect for you. Sarah felt a tiny bit of hope. Do you really think I can learn it in 8 weeks? I know you can, Professor Chun said, but you will need to practice every day. The music room is open after school until 6 o'clock. You can practice there if you want, Sarah nodded. Thank you, Professor Chun. As Sarah walked home from school that day, she thought about the assignment. 8 weeks to learn a piece by Beethoven. 8 weeks to get ready to play in front of judges who decided if students were good enough for the state conservatory. Sarah lived in a small apartment with her mother and little brother. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building. The stairs creaked when you walked up them, and the walls were thin. You could hear the neighbors talking and their televisions playing. The piano had arrived 6 months ago. It was Sarah's grandmother's old upright piano. Her grandmother had lived in a house with more space, but when she moved to a retirement home, she could not take the piano with her. Rosa wants you to have it, Sarah's mother had said. She says music should stay in the family. The piano was old and a little out of tune, but Sarah loved it. She had never thought about taking piano lessons before the piano arrived, but something about having it in their living room made her want to learn. Sarah's mother worked 2 jobs, so money was tight. But when Sarah asked about piano lessons, her mother found a way to pay for them. If this is something you really want to do, we'll make it work, she had said. Now, 6 months later, Sarah was in a music theory class with students who had been playing for years. She felt like she was trying to catch up to a train that had left the station long before she even knew there was a station, but she had chosen her piece, Für Elise by Beethoven. Tomorrow she would go to the music store and buy the sheet music. Tomorrow she would start learning the most important piece she had ever attempted to play. That night Sarah lay in bed thinking about the performance. 8 weeks felt like a long time and no time at all. She thought about the judges from the state conservatory. She thought about her classmates who could play pieces she had never even heard of, but she also thought about her grandmother's piano, sitting in their living room. She thought about the way the keys felt under her fingers and the way music could make her forget about everything else. Maybe she could do this. Maybe 8 weeks was enough time. Maybe Für Elise was the perfect piece for her first real performance. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself playing on stage. Instead of feeling scared, she tried to imagine feeling proud. She tried to imagine her grandmother Rosa in the audience, smiling and clapping. 8 weeks to go. The next day after school, Sarah walked to the music store downtown. The store was small and cramped, with shelves full of sheet music and instruments hanging on the walls. An old man with a white beard sat behind the counter reading a newspaper. I need the sheet music for Für Elise by Beethoven, Sarah said. The old man looked up from his paper. A classic choice, he said with a smile. First time playing Beethoven? Sarah nodded. Yes, sir. He found the sheet music and handed it to her. This piece has fooled many students, he said. It starts simple, but it gets tricky in the middle. Don't give up when you get to the hard parts. Sarah paid for the music and walked back to school. The music room was empty when she arrived. It was a small room with white walls and one window that looked out at the parking lot. There was an old piano in the corner and some chairs stacked against the wall. Sarah sat at the piano and opened the sheet music. The first page looked simple enough. She knew some of the notes already. She placed her fingers on the keys and tried to play the opening. The melody was beautiful, just like she remembered from hearing her grandmother hum it. But after the first few measures, Sarah's fingers started to stumble. There were notes she had never played before. There were rhythms that seemed complicated. Sarah tried again and again. Each time she made it a little further before making mistakes. Her fingers felt clumsy and slow. She could hear what the music was supposed to sound like in her head, but her hands could not make it happen after an hour of practice. Sarah felt frustrated. She had only learned the first page and there were 3 more pages to go. At this rate, it would take her months just to play through the piece once. The next day, Sarah came back to the music room after school. This time, a few other students were there practicing too. Emma was at the piano next to her, playing a complicated piece that sounded like water flowing over rocks. Her fingers moved so fast that Sarah could barely see them. Madison was practicing. At another piano, she was playing something by Chopin that made Sarah think of butterflies dancing. The music was so beautiful and so difficult that Sarah stopped her own practice just to listen. Sarah looked down at her simple Für Elise and felt embarrassed. Her piece sounded like a child's song compared to what her classmates were playing. "Don't worry," Emma said during a break. "Everyone starts somewhere. I remember when I first learned Für Elise, it took me 3 months. 3 months. Sarah had 6 weeks left. David, the boy who was planning to play Bach, walked over to Sarah's piano. "Can I hear what you're working on?" he asked. Sarah's face turned red. "It's not very good yet," she said. "Come on, let me hear it." Sarah played the first page, making several mistakes. When she finished, David nodded politely. "That's a nice piece," he said, "very sick." But Sarah could tell from his voice that he thought it was too easy. Too simple for a student in Professor Chun's advanced class. Every day after school, Sarah went to the music room to practice. Every day she made a little progress, but it felt like she was climbing a mountain with no top. The middle section of Für Elise was much harder than the beginning. There were fast runs of notes that her fingers could not play smoothly. There were jumps between high and low notes that made her hands feel twisted. Week after week went by. Sarah practiced every day, sometimes staying until the janitor came to clean the room. Mr. Rodriguez was a kind man with gray hair and warm eyes. He had worked at the school for 20 years. "You're here late again, Mia," Mr. Rodriguez would say when he found Sarah still practicing at 6 o'clock. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. I can leave if you need to clean." No, you keep playing. I like to hear the music while I work." Sometimes Sarah would make so many mistakes that she wanted to cry. Her fingers felt stupid and clumsy. The notes on the page seemed to dance around, making no sense. She would start over and over again, playing the same measures until her head hurt. One evening, after a particularly bad practice session, Sarah put her head down on the piano keys. The sound they made was ugly and harsh like her feelings. "Rough day?" Mr. Rodriguez asked. He was mopping the floor nearby. "I don't think I can do this," Sarah said without lifting her head. "Everyone else is so much better than me. They've been playing for years. I've only been playing for 6 months." Mr. Rodriguez stopped mopping and sat down in one of the chairs. "Can I tell you something, Mia?" Sarah lifted her head and looked at him. "When I was young, I wanted to be a teacher," Mr. Rodriguez said, "but my English was not good. I was afraid people would laugh at me, so I never tried. I took this job, cleaning schools instead." Sarah listened quietly. "But you know what? Every day I watch students like you trying to learn new things, trying to be better, and I think about how brave you are. You could have chosen an easy piece, but you chose something that challenges you. But what if I fail? What if I embarrass myself in front of those judges?" Mr. Rodriguez smiled. "Mia, sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the heart that has to fight the hardest. The students who learn everything easy, they don't know what it feels like to really work for something. But you're learning something more than just piano. You're learning that you don't give up." After Mr. Rodriguez left that night, Sarah stayed a few more minutes. She played through Für Elise one more time. She still made mistakes, but something felt different. Maybe it was what Mr. Rodriguez had said, or maybe it was just the quiet of the empty school. But the music sounded a little more like music and a little less like noise. The weeks continued to pass. Sarah's practice sessions became a routine. School, then straight to the music room, then home for dinner and homework. Her fingers were getting stronger. The notes that had seemed impossible at first were becoming possible, even if they were not perfect yet. But Sarah could not shake the feeling that she was not good enough. When she listened to her classmates practice, they sounded like real musicians. When she listened to herself, she sounded like someone pretending to be a musician. Emma had finished learning her Moonlight Sonata and was now polishing it, adding expression and feeling to every note. Madison was working on the most difficult parts of her Chopin piece, making them sound effortless, and Sarah was still struggling with the middle section of Für Elise. One afternoon, Professor Chun came into the music room while Sarah was practicing. She had not heard him come in, and when she saw him, she stopped playing immediately. "Please continue," he said. "I was just checking on how everyone is progressing." Sarah's hands were shaking a little, but she played through the piece. She made several mistakes in the middle section, but she kept going until the end. "How do you feel about your progress?" Professor Chun asked when she finished. "I feel like I'm behind everyone else," Sarah said honestly. Professor Chun sat down next to her on the piano bench. "Sarah, do you know why I gave this assignment? To test what we've learned this semester? Partly, yes. But also to teach you something that cannot be learned from books or lectures. Music is not a competition with other people. It's a conversation between you and the composer. Beethoven wrote Für Elise more than 200 years ago, but when you play it, you bring it to life again." Sarah thought about this. "But what if I'm not good enough to bring it to life the right way?" "There is no right way, Sarah. Is only your way." The judges from the conservatory are not looking for perfection. They are looking for students who understand that music is about communication, not just technique. After Professor Chun left, Sarah sat alone at the piano. She thought about what he had said, a conversation with Beethoven. She had never thought about it that way before. Sarah played the opening of Für Elise again, but this time she tried to think about what Beethoven might have been feeling when he wrote it. The melody was gentle and sweet, like someone talking to a friend. Maybe that was what she needed to focus on, not just getting all the notes right. 4 weeks left until the performance. 4 weeks to turn her struggle into something that sounded like music. 4 weeks to find her own conversation with Beethoven. As Sarah packed up her sheet music that evening, she realized that even though she was still scared about the performance, something had changed. She was no longer just trying to survive the assignment. She was starting to care about the music itself. That was progress, even if her fingers still stumbled on the fast parts. 3 weeks before the performance, Sarah was practicing at home on her grandmother's old piano. She was struggling with the same section that had been giving her trouble for days. Her fingers kept hitting wrong notes and the rhythm felt off. The more she tried, the worse it sounded. Sarah's mother was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of rice and beans filled the small apartment. Her little brother Miguel was watching cartoons on the television, and the sound mixed with Sarah's piano practice in a way that made both things sound messy. "I can't do this," Sarah said out loud, putting her hands in her lap. Her mother looked over from the stove. "What's wrong, Mia?" "This piece is too hard for me. I'm going to embarrass myself in front of everyone." Just then there was a knock at the door. Sarah's mother opened it, and there stood Grandmother Rosa. She was a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore her best dress, the blue one with tiny flowers, and carried a purse that was older than Sarah. "Abuela," Miguel shouted, running to hug her. "Hello, my loves," Rosa said, hugging Miguel and kissing Sarah's mother on the cheek. "I thought I would visit and see how Sarah is doing with her music." Rosa had not visited since the piano arrived 6 months ago. She lived in a retirement home across town, and it was hard for her to travel. But somehow she had found a way to come today. "Sarah is having some trouble with her piece," Sarah's mother explained. Rosa walked over to where Sarah sat at the piano. "What piece are you learning, Minita?" "Für Elise by Beethoven," Sarah said. "But I don't think I can do it. It's too hard." Rosa's eyes lit up. "Für Elise, may I see the music?" Sarah handed her the sheet music. Rosa looked at it for a long moment, her fingers moving slightly as if she were playing the notes in her mind. "Play it for me," Rosa said gently. "But Abuela, it doesn't sound good. I make mistakes. Play it anyway. I want to hear what you've learned." Sarah played through the piece. making several mistakes but finishing all the way to the end. When she stopped, she expected Rosa to say something encouraging but not very helpful, the way adults usually did. Instead, Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "May I?" Sarah moved over on the piano bench. Rosa sat down and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers were old and had some arthritis, but when she began to play, something magical happened. Rosa played Für Elise, but it was not the same piece that Sarah had been struggling with. It was the same notes, the same melody, but Rosa added something that made it completely different. She played with a rhythm that reminded Sarah of the folk songs her grandmother used to sing. She added little decorations to the melody that sounded like guitar music. She played some parts softer and some parts stronger in ways that made the music tell a story. When Rosa finished, the apartment was completely quiet. Even Miguel had stopped watching cartoons and was staring at his grandmother. "Abuela," Sarah whispered, "that was beautiful. How did you do that?" Rosa smiled. "That is how I learned to play this piece many years ago." "You know how to play piano?" Sarah's mother came over from the kitchen. She looked surprised, too. "Mama, I never knew you could play like that," Rosa laughed softly. "There are many things you don't know about your old grandmother." "Sarah, come sit next to me. I have a story to tell you." Sarah sat down next to Rosa on the piano bench. Her grandmother's hands were still resting on the keys. "When I was 17 years old, I lived in Mexico," Rosa began. "I was studying to be a pianist. I had won a scholarship to study at the conservatory in Mexico City. I was going to be a professional musician." "Really?" Sarah could hardly believe it. "Yes, I practiced every day for hours. I dreamed of playing in concert halls and teaching music to students like you." "What happened?" Sarah asked. Rosa's smile became a little sad. "Life happened, mi Nita. I met your grandfather, and we decided to come to America for better opportunities. But when we arrived, I had to work in factories to help support our family. There was no time for piano lessons or concerts. The only piano I could afford was this old one." Rosa patted the piano keys gently. "For 50 years, this piano has been with me. It moved from apartment to apartment, house to house. I would play it sometimes late at night when everyone was sleeping. I would play the music I remembered from my studies, but I would also play it the way my grandmother taught me when I was a little girl." "Your grandmother played piano too?" "No, she played guitar and sang folk songs in the streets of Guadalajara. She taught me that music is not just about playing the notes exactly as they are written. Music is about bringing your own heart, your own story, to the composer's story." Sarah looked at the sheet music for Für Elise. "But this is classical music. It's supposed to be played a certain way, isn't it?" Rosa shook her head. "Music is music, mi Nita. When I played this piece for my audition at the conservatory, I played it with the rhythms and feelings that my grandmother taught me. The judges said it was the most interesting interpretation they had ever heard." "Really?" "Really. They said I was not just playing Beethoven's notes. I was having a conversation between Beethoven and my own musical heritage." Sarah thought about this. "Professor Chun said something like that. He said music is a conversation with the composer. Your professor is a smart man. Now, let me teach you what my grandmother taught me." For the next hour, Rosa showed Sarah how to think about Für Elise in a different way. She taught her how to add small changes to the rhythm that made it sound more like the folk music that ran through their family. She showed her how to play certain notes with a different touch that made them sound warmer and more personal. "The most important thing," Rosa said, "is that you don't lose the beauty of Beethoven's original melody, but you can add your own voice to it. You can make it tell the story of who you are, not just who Beethoven was." Sarah tried playing the piece again, this time adding some of the ideas Rosa had shown her. It was still not perfect, but it sounded different. It sounded more like her. "That's it," Rosa said with excitement. "Do you hear the difference? You are not just playing notes anymore. You are making music." As the evening went on, Rosa shared more stories about her musical past. She told Sarah about the conservatory where she studied, about the teachers who encouraged her, and about the dreams she had to give up when she came to America. But you know what? Rosa said, those dreams were not really lost. They were just waiting for the right time, the right person. Maybe they were waiting for you? Sarah felt something she had never felt before. She felt connected to something bigger than just her assignment for Professor Chun's class. She felt connected to her grandmother's dreams, to her great-grandmother's folk songs, and to generations of music that lived in her family. Abuela, will you help me prepare for my performance? Of course, mi Nita. But remember, this is not about playing the piece perfectly. This is about finding your own voice and sharing it with the world. That night, after Rosa had gone back to the retirement home, Sarah sat at the piano alone. She played through Für Elise again, trying to remember everything her grandmother had taught her. Some of it was hard to remember, and some of it felt strange to her fingers. But something important had changed. For the first time since Professor Chun had given the assignment, Sarah was excited about her performance. She was not just thinking about getting through the piece without making mistakes. She was thinking about sharing something beautiful and personal with the audience. She was thinking about honoring her grandmother's dreams while creating something new of her own. The next day at school, Sarah felt different when she walked into the music room. Emma was there practicing her Moonlight Sonata, and Madison was working on her Chopin piece. But instead of feeling intimidated, Sarah felt curious. She wondered what stories their music might tell. If they added their own voices to the composer's voices. When Sarah started practicing, several students stopped to listen. Her Für Elise sounded different than it had the week before. It was still not perfect, but it had something that made people want to keep listening. That sounds really interesting, Emma said during a break. Are you doing something different with the rhythm? Sarah smiled. My grandmother taught me some things. Your grandmother plays piano? She used to study to be a professional pianist. In Mexico, Sarah said proudly. For the first time, Sarah felt like she had something special to contribute to the class. Not just technical skill or years of experience, but a different way of thinking about music itself. 3 weeks to go until the performance. But now, instead of 3 weeks to survive, it felt like 3 weeks to prepare something amazing. The next day after school, Sarah called her grandmother Rosa from the school office. She had never called the retirement home before, but she needed to ask Rosa something important. Abuela, could you come help me practice? I want to learn more. About what you showed me yesterday? Of course, mi Nita. I will ask Mrs. Henderson if she can drive me to your school tomorrow. Mrs. Henderson was Rosa's friend at the retirement home. She had a car and sometimes helped the residents with errands. Rosa had been telling her about Sarah's piano performance, and Mrs. Henderson was excited to help. The next afternoon, Rosa arrived at Lincoln High School carrying a small bag and wearing her comfortable shoes. Sarah met her in the main office and walked her to the music room. This is where you practice every day? Rosa asked, looking around the small room. Yes, until 6 o'clock when Mr. Rodriguez needs to clean. Rosa sat down at the piano and played a few notes to test how it sounded. This is a good piano, she said. Old, but it has character. Sarah played through Für Elise the way she had. Been practicing it? Rosa listened carefully, nodding at some parts and frowning slightly at others. You are getting better with the technique, Rosa said. But now we need to work on the feeling. Music without feeling is just noise with good timing. Rosa opened her small bag and pulled out some old sheet music. The pages were yellow and had writing in the margins. These are some pieces I learned when I was your age, she said. But first, let me tell you more about our family's music. Rosa moved over on the piano bench so Sarah could sit next to her. My grandmother, your bisabuela Carmen, came from a family of musicians in Guadalajara. She played guitar and sang in the town square to earn money for food. She taught me that music should make people feel something, not just impress them. Rosa played a simple melody on the piano. It sounded like sunshine and warm afternoons. This is a song Carmen used to sing about a little bird that wanted to fly higher than the mountains. Sarah listened to the beautiful melody. It sounds happy and sad at the same time. Exactly. That is what good music does. It makes you feel more than one thing. Now, let me show you how Carmen's music can fit with Beethoven's music. Rosa played the opening of Für Elise, but she added the rhythm and feeling of Carmen's birdsong. The classical melody became something warmer and more alive. Do you hear how they work together? Rosa asked. Beethoven was writing about love and longing. Carmen was singing about dreams and hope. They are talking about the same human feelings, just in different languages. Sarah tried to play the opening of Für Elise with the rhythm Rosa had shown. It felt strange at first, but after a few tries, it started to make sense. Good, Rosa said. Now let me teach you about the middle section. This is where Beethoven's feelings get more complicated. The middle section of Für Elise had been the hardest part for Sarah. The notes moved fast, and there were big jumps between high and low keys. Rosa showed her how to think about this section as a conversation between two people who were having an argument. One hand is saying one thing, the other hand is answering back, Rosa explained. But they still love each other even when they disagree. Rosa played the middle section, making it sound like two voices talking to each other. Sometimes they argued, sometimes they agreed, sometimes one voice would comfort the other. In our family's music we have songs about disagreements too, Rosa said. She played a folk melody that sounded like two guitars having a musical argument. See, same idea, different style? Sarah practiced the middle section with Rosa's guidance. Instead of just trying to hit all the notes correctly, she tried to make it sound like a conversation. It was still difficult, but now it had meaning. My fingers still aren't fast enough, Sarah said after several attempts. Speed comes with practice, Rosa said. But feeling comes first. If you play slowly with good feeling, people will listen. If you play fast with no feeling, people will get bored. Rosa came to school every day for the next week. Mrs. Henderson would drop her off at 3:30 and pick her up at 5:30. During those 2 hours, Rosa taught Sarah much more than just piano technique. She told Sarah about her years at the conservatory in Mexico City. The teachers there were very strict, Rosa said. They wanted everyone to play exactly the same way. But my favorite teacher, Maestro Valdez, told me privately that the best musicians find ways to honor the composer while still being themselves. Rosa showed Sarah old photographs from her time at the conservatory. There was a picture of Rosa at 18 and sitting at a grand piano and wearing a white dress. She looked confident and full of dreams. What happened to your scholarship? Sarah asked. I met your grandfather at a dance, Rosa said with a smile. He was studying engineering, and he had a chance to come to America for work. We were young and in love. We thought we could have both the American dream and my music career. But it didn't work out that way. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Life is complicated, Minita. We came to America, and your grandfather found work in a factory. I tried to find piano students to teach, but my English was not good enough. We needed money, so I took a job in a clothing factory. Every day I told myself it was temporary. But temporary became years, and years became decades. Sarah felt sad for her grandmother. Do you regret it? No, Rosa said firmly. I have had a good life. I have children and grandchildren who I love. And now I have you carrying on the music. Sometimes dreams don't come true the way we expect, but they find other ways to come true. Rosa taught Sarah about dynamics, how to play some parts loud and some parts soft to create emotion. She taught her about phrasing, how to group notes together like words in a sentence. She taught her about rubato, how to stretch and compress. Time to make the music breathe like a living thing. In our folk music, timing is not rigid like a clock, Rosa explained. It flows like conversation, like breathing, like life. Sarah started to understand that music was much more complex than just reading notes on a page. Every choice she made, how loud, how soft, how fast, how slow, where to pause, where to connect, all of these choices told the audience something about her and about her understanding of the music. Professor Chung was right, Sarah said one afternoon. Music really is a conversation with the composer. Yes, but it is also a conversation with everyone who has ever played this music before you, Rosa said. When you play for Elise, you are joining a conversation that started with Beethoven over 200 years ago. You are adding your voice to thousands of other voices. Rosa pulled out another piece of old sheet music. This is something I arranged myself when I was at the conservatory, she said. I took a Chopin nocturne and combined it with a lullaby my mother used to sing. She played the piece, and Sarah could hear both the classical elegance of Chopin and the simple warmth of a folk lullaby. They fit together perfectly, creating something that was both sophisticated and deeply personal. The judges at the conservatory said this piece showed them who I really was as a musician, Rosa said. Not just someone who could play other people's music well, but someone who could create new meaning from old traditions. Do you think I could do something like that with Für Elise? You are already doing it, Minita. Every time you add the rhythms and feelings I have taught you, you are creating your own version. You are making Beethoven's music speak with your voice. On Friday of that week, Rosa brought a special surprise. She had asked Mrs. Henderson to help her carry in an old tape recorder and some cassette tapes. These are recordings I made years ago, Rosa said. I want you to hear how our family's music sounds. She played a tape of herself singing folk songs with guitar accompaniment. The voice on the tape was younger, but Sarah could recognize her grandmother's warm tone. The songs were in Spanish, but Sarah could understand the emotions even without knowing all the words. This next song is about a young woman leaving home to follow her dreams, Rosa said as she started another tape. It is about being brave even when you are scared. The song was beautiful and melancholy. It made Sarah think about her own fears, about the performance and her dreams of becoming a better musician. Abuela, do you ever miss performing? Every day, Rosa said honestly. But when I listen to you play, when I see you learning and growing, I feel like I'm performing again. Your success is my success. Your music is my music too. That afternoon, Sarah played through Für Elise, incorporating everything Rosa had taught her over the past week. The classical structure was still there, but now it had layers of meaning and feeling. That came from her family's musical traditions. Other students in the music room stopped their own practice to listen. Emma came over when Sarah finished. That was amazing, Emma said. It sounded like Für Elise, but also like something completely new. My grandmother is teaching me about our family's music, Sarah explained. You're so lucky, Emma said. I wish I had a grandmother who could teach me things like that. When Rosa had to leave that day, she hugged Sarah tightly. You are ready to make this piece your own, she said. Trust yourself, trust the music, trust our family's story. 2 weeks left until the performance. But now Sarah felt like she had more than just a piece to play. She had a story to tell, a heritage to honor, and a new understanding of what it meant to be a musician. The music was becoming hers. 1 week before the performance, Sarah was feeling confident about her version of Für Elise. She had been practicing with Rosa's guidance for 2 weeks, and the piece was starting to feel natural under her fingers. The folk rhythms and classical melody worked together beautifully, creating something that felt both traditional and personal. Sarah arrived at the music room early that Monday afternoon. She wanted to practice before the other students arrived, so she could work on the more experimental parts of her interpretation without feeling self-conscious. As she played through the piece, she felt proud of how far she had come. The middle section that had given her so much trouble was now flowing smoothly. The dynamics and phrasing that Rosa had taught her made the music come alive. Just as Sarah finished playing, she heard voices in the hallway outside the music room. The door was slightly open, and she could hear Professor Chun talking to another teacher. I'm concerned about Sarah Martinez's unconventional interpretation, Professor Chun was saying. Sarah froze. They were talking about her. What do you mean? Asked the other voice. Sarah recognized it as Ms. Williams, who taught music history. She's adding elements that aren't in the original score, Professor Chun said. Folk rhythms, different phrasing, changes to the dynamics that Beethoven didn't write. I'm worried the conservatory judges will think she doesn't understand classical style. Have you talked to her about it? I've tried to guide her toward a more traditional interpretation, but she seems set on this fusion approach. I don't want her to embarrass herself in front of the judges. These are serious classical musicians. They expect to hear Beethoven, not some folk music hybrid. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Professor Chun thought her interpretation was wrong. He thought she would embarrass herself. Maybe you should have her play it straight, Ms. Williams suggested. Save the experimentation for when she's more advanced. That's what I'm thinking. I'll talk to her today. Sarah heard their footsteps, moving away down the hall. She sat at the piano, staring at the keys, feeling like she might cry. Everything Rosa had taught her, all the family history and musical traditions they had woven into the piece, Professor Chun thought it was a mistake. Few minutes later, other students started arriving for practice time. Madison came in first, carrying her sheet music for the Chopin piece she was performing. "Hey, Sarah," Madison said cheerfully. "How's your piece coming along?" "Fine," Sarah said quietly. Madison sat down at the piano next to Sarah's and started warming up with scales. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, playing complicated patterns that sounded like water flowing over stones. Emma arrived next, followed by David and several other students. Soon the room was filled with the sound of classical music being practiced at a high level. Sarah listened to her classmates and felt the confidence she had built up over the past 2 weeks starting to crumble. Madison was playing her Chopin piece, and it sounded exactly like the recordings Sarah had heard of famous pianists performing the same piece. Every note was perfect, every rhythm was precise. Every dynamic marking was followed exactly as the composer had written it. David's Bach invention was crisp and mathematical, with each voice clearly defined and every ornament played in the traditional style. Emma's Moonlight Sonata was mysterious and romantic, capturing the exact mood that Beethoven had intended. Sarah started to play her version of Für Elise, but she felt self-conscious about the folk rhythms Rosa had taught her. They sounded strange and out of place compared to the traditional classical music her classmates were playing. "That's an interesting take on Für Elise," Madison said during a break. But her tone suggested that interesting was not necessarily a good thing. "My grandmother taught me some different ways to play it," Sarah explained. "Oh," Madison said. "Well, I'm sure the judges will appreciate creativity." But the way Madison said creativity made it sound like a polite word for wrong. David came over to listen when Sarah played through the piece again. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "It's definitely unique," he said finally. "But are you sure that's how you want to play it for the judges? I mean, they're from the State Conservatory. They probably expect a more traditional interpretation." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, even though she was afraid of the answer. "Well, Für Elise is a classic piece. There's a certain way it's supposed to be played. The judges will be listening for proper classical technique and interpretation. They might not understand what you're trying to do with all those changes." Sarah felt her face getting hot. "You think it sounds bad?" No, David said quickly. "It's not bad. It's just different. Maybe too different for a classical music performance." After David walked away, Sarah sat alone at the piano feeling confused and discouraged. For 2 weeks, she had been excited about her unique interpretation. Rosa had made her feel like she was creating something special, something that honored both Beethoven and her family's musical heritage, but now her teacher and her classmates were telling her that different was wrong, that the judges would expect traditional, and traditional was what she was not giving them. Sarah tried playing Für Elise, the way she had originally learned it, without any of Rosa's influence. It sounded correct and proper, but it also sounded empty and boring. All the life and personality that she and Rosa had put into the music was gone, but maybe that was what classical music was supposed to be. Maybe Sarah had been fooling herself to think she could bring her own voice to Beethoven's composition. When Professor Chun came into the music room later that afternoon, Sarah was ready for his criticism. "Sarah, could I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. Sarah followed him to a quiet corner of the room. Her heart was beating fast. "I've been listening to your interpretation of Für-Elise," Professor Chun said gently, "and I'm concerned that you might be making it more complicated than it needs to be." "What do you mean?" "The folk elements you've been adding, the changes to the rhythm and phrasing, while they're creative, I'm not sure they're appropriate for this setting. The judges from the conservatory will be expecting a traditional classical interpretation." Sarah looked down at her hands. "My grandmother taught me those things. She studied at a conservatory in Mexico." "I'm sure your grandmother is very talented," Professor Chun said. "But this is a formal classical music performance. There are certain standards and expectations. I don't want you to take risks that might hurt your grade or your reputation with the judges. So you think I should play it normally?" "I think you should play it the way Beethoven wrote it. Focus on clean technique, proper dynamics, and traditional phrasing. Save the experimentation for when you have more experience." After Professor Chun walked away, Sarah felt like crying. Everything she had learned from Rosa, all the joy and meaning she had discovered in the music, was being dismissed as experimentation that wasn't good enough for serious classical musicians. That evening, Sarah went home feeling more discouraged than she had felt since the beginning of the assignment. She sat at her grandmother's old piano, but couldn't bring herself to practice. The keys felt cold and unfriendly. Her mother noticed that Sarah was quiet during dinner. "How's your practice going, Mia?" "Fine," Sarah said, but she didn't sound convincing. "Are you nervous about the performance?" Sarah wanted to tell her mother about the conversation with Professor Chun and the comments from her classmates. She wanted to explain how confused she felt about whether to follow Rosa's teaching or play it safe with a traditional interpretation, but instead, she just said, "A little." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the performance. 1 week to go, and she had no idea how to play her piece. Should she trust Rosa's guidance and risk embarrassing herself with the judges? Or should she abandon everything that made the music personal and meaningful to her? Rosa had made her feel like music was about bringing your own story to the composer's story. But Professor Chun and her classmates made her feel like classical music was about following rules and meeting expectations. Sarah thought about Rosa's dreams of becoming a professional pianist, and how those dreams had been interrupted by life circumstances. Maybe Rosa's approach to music was outdated. Maybe the fusion of folk and classical elements that had seemed so beautiful was actually just wrong. But when Sarah remembered how Rosa's eyes had lit up when they played together, when she thought about the family history and musical traditions that Rosa had shared with her, it was hard to believe that was all wrong. The next day at school, Sarah felt lost. She went to the music room for practice, but she didn't know what to practice. She tried playing Für-Elise the traditional way, but it felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. She tried playing it Rosa's way, but she could hear Professor Chun's voice telling her it wasn't appropriate. Emma noticed that Sarah seemed upset. "Are you okay?" she asked during a break. "I don't know how to play my piece anymore," Sarah admitted. "What do you mean?" Sarah explained about the different approaches she had been taught, and how confused she felt about which one was right. Emma listened thoughtfully. "That's tough," she said. "But maybe you don't have to choose between them completely. Maybe you could find a middle ground." "What do you mean?" The night before the performance, Sarah sat alone at her grandmother's piano in the small apartment. Her mother was working late at her second job, and Miguel was asleep in his room. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of traffic outside, and the occasional footstep from the neighbors upstairs. Sarah had spent the entire week feeling torn between two different ways of playing Für-Elise. She had practiced the traditional version that Professor Chun wanted her to play. She had also practiced Rosa's fusion version that felt like home in her hands. But she could not decide which one to perform tomorrow. Earlier that day, Rosa had come to school for what might be their last practice session together. Sarah had explained her dilemma to her grandmother. "Professor Chun thinks the judges won't understand your approach," Sarah had said. "He thinks I should play it the traditional way to be safe." Rosa had been quiet for a long moment. Then she had said, "Minita, let me tell you about the last time I performed in public." Rosa had told Sarah about her final audition at the conservatory in Mexico City. It was 1962, and Rosa was competing for a scholarship that would have allowed her to study in Europe. I had prepared a Bach prelude exactly as my teachers had taught me, Rosa had said. Perfect technique, traditional interpretation, no personal expression. But when I sat down at the piano in front of the judges, something happened. What happened? I thought about my grandmother Carmen, who had died the year before. I thought about all the songs she had taught me, all the stories she had told me about our family's music. And I realized that if I played that Bach piece like everyone else, I would be hiding the most important part of who I was. Rosa had played a few measures of the Bach prelude on the school piano, first in the traditional style, then with the folk influences her grandmother had taught her. The judges were surprised, Rosa had continued. Some of them frowned. But at the end, the head judge said something I will never forget. He said, "Miss Rosa, you are not just a pianist. You are a musician. There is a difference. Did you win?" The scholarship? Yes, I did. But more importantly, I learned that music without soul is just noise, no matter how perfectly you play it. Now, sitting alone at the piano, Sarah thought about Rosa's story. She thought about her grandmother's scholarship that she never got to use because of life circumstances. She thought about the dreams that had been put aside but never forgotten. Sarah placed her hands on the keys and played, through Für Elise, the traditional way. It sounded correct and clean, but it felt like she was wearing a mask. The music said nothing about who she was or where she came from. Then she played it Rosa's way, with the folk rhythms and personal phrasing her grandmother had taught her. It sounded like a conversation between past and present, between Germany and Mexico, between Beethoven and her family's musical heritage. Sarah thought about Professor Schön's concerns. He was probably right that the judges would expect a traditional interpretation. Playing Rosa's version was a risk that could hurt her grade or embarrass her in front of the conservatory representatives, but she also thought about Mr. Rodriguez's words. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the heart that has to fight the hardest. Sarah got up from the piano and walked to the window. She could see the lights of the city spreading out below. Somewhere out there, Rosa was probably lying in her bed at the retirement home, thinking about tomorrow's performance. What would Rosa do if she were 18 years old again? Would she play it safe to please the judges, or would she honor the musical traditions that had shaped her? Sarah knew the answer. Rosa had already shown her what to do with her own story about the Bach. Audition. Sarah went back to the piano and opened the bench. Inside, she found the old sheet music that Rosa had brought to show her. There were pieces Rosa had arranged herself, combining classical composers with folk melodies. There were songs Rosa had written that told the story of leaving Mexico and starting a new life in America. At the bottom of the pile, Sarah found something she had never seen before. It was a program from a concert in Mexico City in 1962. Rosa's name was listed as one of the performers. Next to her name it said, Bach Prelude in C major, arranged by Rosa Gutierrez Martinez. Rosa had not just played Bach traditionally. She had created her own arrangement, putting her name next to Bach's as a co-creator of the music. Sarah looked at the program for a long time. This was proof that Rosa's approach was not wrong or inappropriate. It was actually what had made her special enough to win a scholarship to study in Europe. Sarah made her decision. She would play Für Elise the way Rosa had taught her. She would honor both Beethoven's beautiful composition and her family's musical heritage. She would risk the judges' disapproval because the alternative was betraying everything that made the music meaningful to her. Sarah practiced her version of Für Elise one more time that night. She played it with all the love and respect she felt for her grandmother, all the pride she felt in her family's story, and all the hope she had for her own future as a musician. When she finished, the apartment felt different. The music seemed to linger in the air, connecting her small living room to the concert halls where Rosa had dreamed of performing, to the streets of Guadalajara where Carmen had sung folk songs, to the conservatory in Mexico City where Rosa had won her scholarship. Sarah realized that tomorrow's performance was not just about her grade in Professor Chun's class. It was about continuing a musical conversation that had started generations before she was born. It was about proving that folk music and classical music could speak to each other across time and culture. It was about making sure that Rosa's dreams, even though they had been interrupted, would live on through Sarah's music. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling calm and determined. She had made her choice, and she felt peaceful about it. Win or lose, she would perform the music that told her story truthfully. Sarah put on her best dress, the black one her mother had bought for special occasions. She braided her hair the way Rosa had taught her, with a small flower tucked behind her ear the way Carmen used to wear them before leaving for school. Sarah called the retirement home to talk to Rosa. "Abuela, I've decided to play our version." "Ah. You sure, Minita? You know there might be consequences?" "I'm sure. Last night I found the program from your concert in Mexico City. I saw that you put your name next to Batch's as an arranger. You showed me that it's okay to bring your own voice to classical music." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Sarah could hear her grandmother crying softly on the other end of the phone. "Abuela, are you okay?" "Yes, Minita. I am more than okay. I am proud. Today you will not just be playing music. You will be setting our family story free." When Sarah arrived at school that morning, she saw the other students practicing nervously in the hallways. Madison was running through difficult passages from her Chopin piece. David was reviewing fingerings for his batch invention. Emma was humming the melody of the Moonlight Sonata. Sarah did not feel the need to practice anymore. She knew her piece by heart, and she knew exactly how she wanted to play it. She felt ready to have the most important musical conversation of her life. In her bag, she carried Rosa's wedding ring on a chain. Rosa had given it to her that morning, asking Mrs. Henderson to bring it to school. "For good luck," Rosa had said, "and to remind you that you are not alone up there. All of our family's music will be with you." Sarah touched the ring through her bag and felt her grandmother's strength flowing into her. Tonight she would play for Elise the way it had never been played before. Tonight she would turn a simple assignment into a celebration of heritage, dreams, and the courage to be authentic. Tonight she would honor Rosa's interrupted dreams by refusing to hide her own voice. The Lincoln High School auditorium was fuller than Sarah had expected. Besides the music students and their families, there were 3 judges from the State Conservatory sitting in the front row with notebooks and serious expressions. Professor Chun sat near the stage, looking nervous as he watched his students prepare for their performances. Sarah's mother had managed to get time off from work to attend. She sat in the middle section wearing her best blouse and looking proud but worried. Miguel was next to her, swinging his legs and looking around at all the people. Rosa sat in the front section, having been brought by Mrs. Henderson from the retirement home. She wore her blue dress with the tiny flowers and had her silver hair pinned up beautifully. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she kept looking at the grand piano on stage with tears in her eyes. The performance order had been determined by drawing names from a hat. Madison would perform first, followed by David, then Emma, and several other students. Sarah was scheduled to perform 7th out of 12 students. Professor Chun walked onto the stage to introduce the program. "Welcome, everyone, to our semester end Classical Piano Performance Showcase. These students have worked very hard to prepare pieces that demonstrate their understanding of classical style and technique. We are honored to have with us 3 distinguished judges from the State Conservatory." He introduced each judge. Dr. Patricia Wells was the head of the piano department at the conservatory. Mr. James Liu was a concert pianist who also taught master classes. Dr. Maria Santos was a musicologist who specialized in classical interpretation and style. The judges looked exactly like Sarah had imagined. They were well-dressed, serious, and carried themselves with the authority of people who had spent their lives studying classical music at the highest level. Madison performed first. Her Chopin piece was technically perfect and musically sophisticated. She played with confidence and grace, hitting every note clearly and following every dynamic marking precisely. When she finished, the audience applauded enthusiastically, and the judges wrote notes in their books with satisfied expressions. David's Bach invention was crisp and mathematical, exactly as Bach had intended. Each voice was clearly defined, and every ornament was executed in the traditional Baroque style. The judges nodded approvingly as he played. Emma's Moonlight Sonata was mysterious and romantic, capturing the exact mood that Beethoven had written into the music. Her technique was flawless, and her interpretation stayed within the traditional boundaries of how the piece was supposed to be played. As Sarah watched her classmates perform, she felt both impressed by their skill and increasingly nervous about her own unconventional approach. Every piece so far had been performed in the traditional classical style. The judges seemed to expect and appreciate this consistency. When the fourth student performed a Mozart sonata exactly as Mozart had written it, Sarah began to wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. Maybe Professor Chun had been right. Maybe. This was not the time or place for experimentation. Sarah touched Rosa's wedding ring through her bag and tried to calm her racing heart. She looked at her grandmother in the audience and saw Rosa watching her with encouraging eyes. The fifth and sixth students performed pieces by Brahms and Schumann. Both played in the traditional style with excellent technique. The judges continued to look pleased and take positive notes. Then Professor Chun called Sarah's name. Our next performer is Sarah Martinez, playing Für Elise by Ludwig van Beethoven. Sarah walked onto the stage, feeling like she was moving through thick water. The grand piano looked enormous under the bright stage lights. The audience seemed much larger from up here than it had from her seat. Sarah adjusted the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. She could see Rosa in the audience, sitting forward in her seat. She could see her mother and Miguel, both looking nervous but supportive. She could see the three judges with their pens ready to write notes about her performance. For a moment, Sarah considered playing the traditional version. It would be safe. It would meet the judges' expectations. It would probably earn her a good grade, but then she thought about Rosa's story of choosing authenticity over safety at her own conservatory audition. She thought about Carmen singing in the streets of Guadalajara. She thought about all the dreams and musical traditions that had led to this moment. Sarah took a deep breath and began to play. She started with the familiar opening melody of Für Elise, playing it traditionally for the first few measures. The judges recognized the piece immediately and settled back in their seats with comfortable expressions, but as the melody repeated, Sarah began to add the subtle rhythm changes that Rosa had taught her. The classical three-quarters time began to sway with the influence of Mexican folk rhythms. The melody remained Beethoven's, but it started to breathe with a different kind of life. Sarah could see the judges lean forward slightly, their expressions changing from comfortable to curious. Professor Chun looked worried, but Rosa was smiling with tears in her eyes. As Sarah moved into the middle section of the piece, she made it sound like the musical conversation that Rosa had described. The rapid passages became a dialogue between classical European tradition and Mexican folk heritage. The technical challenges were still there, but now they served a larger musical story. Sarah played the descending runs like water flowing down mountain slopes. She played the ascending passages like birds soaring above ancient towns. The folk rhythms her grandmother had taught her made Beethoven's harmonies dance with new energy. The audience was completely quiet, but it was not the polite quiet of a traditional classical performance. It was the focused quiet of people hearing something they had never heard before, something that surprised and moved them. When Sarah reached the return of the main melody, she brought back all the traditional beauty of Beethoven's original, but now it was layered with everything she had learned about her family's musical heritage. The simple tune that had started the piece was transformed into something that spoke multiple languages at once. As Sarah played the final measures, she thought about Rosa's interrupted dreams and her own hopes for the future. She thought about the courage it took to be authentic in a world that often rewarded conformity. She thought about music as a bridge between cultures and generations when the last note faded away. The auditorium was completely silent for several seconds. Sarah sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, wondering if the silence meant she had succeeded or failed. Then Rosa started clapping. Slowly, other people joined in. Sarah's mother was clapping and crying at the same time. Miguel was clapping enthusiastically, not fully understanding what had happened, but knowing it was something special. The applause grew louder and more sustained than it had been for any of the previous performances. People in the audience were standing up, and Sarah realized that she was receiving a standing ovation. Sarah looked at the judges. Dr. Wells was writing furiously in her notebook. Mr. Liu was staring at the piano with a thoughtful expression. Dr. Santos was applauding slowly, with a small smile on her face. Professor Chun looked shocked but not displeased. He seemed to be realizing that something unexpected but significant had just happened. Sarah stood up from the piano bench and took a small bow. As she walked off the stage, she felt like she was floating. She had done it. She had played her truth, honored her heritage, and shared something beautiful with the world. In the wings, Emma grabbed her arm. Sarah, that was incredible. I've never heard Fur-Elise played like that before. It was like you made it completely new but kept everything that made it beautiful. Other students gathered around Sarah, all talking at once about her performance. Some said it was brave, some said it was amazing, some said it was unlike anything they had ever heard. But Sarah was looking at the audience, where Rosa was wiping tears from her eyes and smiling with a pride and joy that lit up her entire face. Sarah had taken Rosa's interrupted dreams and given them new life. She had proven that classical music could embrace other traditions without losing its own identity. She had shown that authenticity was worth the risk. The remaining students performed their pieces, all of them excellent and traditionally presented. But Sarah could tell that the mood in the auditorium had changed. Her performance had opened something up, had shown that there were different ways to honor the classical tradition. When all the performances were finished, Professor Chun returned to the stage to thank everyone for coming. But before he could begin his closing remarks, Dr. Wells from the conservatory asked if she could say a few words. In my 30 years of teaching piano, Dr. Wells said, I have heard thousands of student performances. Most of them demonstrate good technique and proper interpretation. But occasionally, very rarely, you hear a performance that reminds you why music exists in the first place. She looked directly at Sarah. Miss Martinez, your interpretation of Fur-Elise was extraordinary. You maintained complete respect for Beethoven's composition while bringing your own cultural heritage into dialogue with his musical ideas. You showed us that tradition is not a museum piece to be preserved unchanged, but a living language that can grow and evolve. The audience applauded again, and Sarah felt her heart soar. After the other families had left the auditorium and the stage lights had been turned off, Sarah sat with Rosa in the front row of seats. Mrs. Henderson had gone to bring the car around, and Sarah's mother was talking with Professor Chun near the stage. Miguel had fallen asleep in one of the auditorium chairs, tired from the excitement of the evening. Abuela, I was so scared up there, Sarah admitted. When I saw those judges writing in their notebooks, I thought maybe I had made a huge mistake. Rosa took Sarah's hand. Fear and courage are not opposites, Minita. Courage is what you do when you feel afraid. Tonight you chose to be brave. Professor Chun walked over to where they were sitting. Sarah expected him to be upset about her unconventional performance, but instead he looked thoughtful and somewhat surprised. Sarah, I owe you an apology, he said, sitting down in the row behind them. I was so worried about you meeting the judges' expectations that I almost prevented you from showing them something truly special. You're not angry that I didn't play it the traditional way? I'm learning that there's a difference between respecting tradition and being trapped by it, Professor Chun said. Your performance tonight taught me something important about what it means to be a musician, not just a piano player. Professor Chun turned to Rosa. Mrs. Martinez, your granddaughter told me that you studied at a conservatory in Mexico. I would love to hear more about your musical background. Rosa's eyes lit up. I would be happy to share those stories with you. As they talked, Sarah realized that her performance had not just been a success for her personally. It had opened up conversations about music, culture, and the meaning of classical tradition that might not have happened otherwise. 20 minutes later, Dr. Wells approached their group. Sarah's heart started beating fast again, wondering if the judge had come to tell her that her performance was inappropriate after all. "Miss Martinez," Dr. Wells said, "could I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah stood up, feeling nervous again. Dr. Wells led her a few steps away from the others. "I wanted to talk to you about your performance tonight," Dr. Wells said. "In my professional opinion, what you did was remarkable. You demonstrated not just technical skill, but musical intelligence and cultural awareness that we rarely see in students your age." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I would like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer conservatory program," Dr. Wells continued. "It's a 4-week intensive program for gifted young musicians. We had planned to offer scholarships only to students who were already studying at advanced levels, but your performance tonight changed my mind." Sarah felt dizzy. "A scholarship to the conservatory?" "Yes, the program includes private lessons with master teachers, ensemble work, and classes in music theory and history. But more importantly, it includes workshops on cultural fusion in classical music, exactly what you demonstrated tonight." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Are you sure?" Dr. Wells smiled. "Miss Martinez, I have been teaching piano for 30 years. I know talent when I hear it. But more than that, I know authenticity when I hear it. What you did tonight was not just technically impressive, it was artistically brave and culturally important." Dr. Wells handed Sarah an information packet about the summer program. "Talk it over with your family, but I hope you'll accept. We need more musicians who understand that classical music is a living tradition, not a museum exhibit." After Dr. Wells left, Sarah ran back to Rosa and her mother to share the news. Rosa started crying again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "A conservatory scholarship," Rosa whispered. "Minita, you have accomplished something I only dreamed of." Sarah's mother hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mia. I don't completely understand what happened tonight, but I know it was something special." Professor Chun shook Sarah's hand formally. "Congratulations, Sarah. You've earned this opportunity through your dedication and your willingness to take artistic risks." On the drive home, with Miguel sleeping in the back seat and Rosa sitting next to Sarah, Sarah's mother asked about the summer program. "It's 4 weeks long," Sarah explained, reading from the information packet. "Private lessons, ensemble work, and special workshops on fusion music." "Can we afford it?" her mother asked quietly. "It's a full scholarship, Mama. Everything is paid for." Sarah's mother was quiet for a moment, then she started crying happy tears. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, referring to Rosa's mother, who had passed away years before. Rosa reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "She is proud, Mia. I can feel it." When they arrived at the apartment building, Mrs. Henderson helped Rosa out of the car. Before getting into Mrs. Henderson's car to go back to the retirement home, Rosa hugged Sarah one more time. "Tonight you proved something very important," Rosa said. "You proved that our family's music was not lost when I had to give up my dreams. It was just waiting for the right person to carry it forward. But Abuela, I couldn't have done any of this without you teaching me. And I couldn't have shared my knowledge without you being brave enough to use it. We did this together, Minita. Tonight was not just your success, it was our family's success." After Rosa left, Sarah and her family went up to their apartment. The old piano sat in the living room just as it always had, but somehow it looked different now. It looked like an instrument that had helped create something important. Sarah sat down at the piano and played through Fur Elise one more time, very softly so she wouldn't wake the neighbors. But this time she wasn't practicing for a performance. She was playing for the pure joy of making music that felt true to who she was. Her mother sat on the couch listening, and even Miguel woke up enough to come sit next to the piano. "Play it again, Sarah," Miguel said sleepily. "I like the way you make it sound like a story." Sarah played it again, thinking about how the simple assignment that had terrified her 3 months ago had become the key to discovering her own musical voice. The next morning at school, Sarah was surprised to find several students waiting for her at her locker. "Sarah, that was amazing last night," said a girl from her English class who Sarah had never really talked to before. "I didn't know classical music could sound like that." "Could you teach me some of those rhythms you used?" asked another student. "I play guitar, and I think they would work for some songs I'm writing." Even Madison, who had always seemed so confident and traditional in her approach to music, came up to Sarah during lunch. "I've been thinking about your performance," Madison said. "I realize that I've never brought any of my own story into my music. I just try to play exactly like the famous pianists I've heard on recordings." "There's nothing wrong with that," Sarah said. "Your Chopin piece was beautiful." "It was technically correct," Madison said. "But it wasn't me. Watching you last night made me realize that I don't know how to put myself into the music." Sarah thought about this. "Maybe you could talk to your family about their musical traditions. Everyone has some kind of music in their background." "My grandmother used to sing Irish folk songs," Madison said thoughtfully. "I wonder if there's a way to bring that into classical music." Sarah smiled. "I bet there is." Word about Sarah's performance spread quickly through the school. Students who had never been interested in classical music started asking questions about the piano program. Some teachers mentioned Sarah's performance in their classes as an example of creative thinking and cultural pride, but the most meaningful response came from Mr. Rodriguez, the janitor who had encouraged Sarah during her difficult practice sessions. "Mia, I heard about your performance," he said when he saw Sarah in the hallway. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there to hear it myself." "That's okay, Mr. Rodriguez, but I wanted to thank you for what you told me that night when I was ready to give up." "What did I tell you?" "You said that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the heart that has to fight the hardest. That's what I remembered when I was on stage last night." Mr. Rodriguez smiled with tears in his eyes. "You know what, Mia? Seeing you succeed makes me think maybe it's not too late for some of my own dreams too." "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about going back to school to become a teacher. I'm 55 years old, but maybe that's not too old to try something new." Sarah felt a warm feeling in her chest. Her performance had not just opened doors for herself. It had inspired other people to think about their own dreams and possibilities over the next few weeks. As Sarah prepared for the summer conservatory program, she continued to practice with Rosa, but now their sessions felt different. They were no longer just preparing for a single performance. They were exploring the endless possibilities that opened up when classical music embraced other traditions. Rosa taught Sarah folk songs from different regions of Mexico, showing her how each one had different rhythms and emotional qualities that could be brought into classical pieces. Sarah learned about mariachi music, indigenous Mexican music, and the Spanish influences that had shaped her family's musical heritage, but Sarah also brought classical pieces to Rosa, showing her how composers like Chopin, Debussy, and Ravel had been influenced by folk music from their own cultures.